Imagine this. It's July 1518. You're living in Strasbourg, a lovely little medieval city in what is now France, but was then part of the Holy Roman Empire. You wake up, step out of your wooden-framed house, swat a few flies away from your breakfast of hard bread and existential dread, and then, wait a minute, is that Frau Trofea? Is she dancing? No music, no rhythm, just wild, swinging limbs, like a toddler trying to fight a bee. But she's not drunk. She's not celebrating. She's possessed, or so people whisper. You stare, unsure whether to clap or run. Well, buckle your codpieces, dear viewers. This is the bizarre, morbidly funny, and oddly footloose tale of the dancing plague of 1518. A moment in history so ridiculous it sounds made up. Before we dive into one of the weirdest moments in human history, where hundreds of people literally dance themselves to death, take a second to hit that like button. It helps more curious minds find this story. Subscribe if you love strange, true tales from history that feel too bizarre to be real. And as you're watching, drop a comment below. What do you think caused the dancing plague? Was it mass hysteria, cursed bread, or just the world's first flash mob gone horribly wrong? Let's get into it. It all began with one woman, Frau Trofea. No one's entirely sure if that was her real name or just what the town called her because, in Strasbourg, everyone seemed to be named Hans or Greta. She walked out into the street one fine morning and began dancing, alone, intensely, arms flying, feet stomping, sweat pouring. Think medieval flash mob, but she was the only one in on it. At first, the neighbors chuckled. Oh ho, Trofea's had one too many honeymeads, or she's been listening to the devil's lute again. But then, she kept going, and going, for days. Now you have to understand, in 1518, medical science was basically a guessing game, played by very confident men with beards. If you had a fever, they'd bleed you. If you had a cough, they'd recommend leeches. If you were dancing uncontrollably for hours, clearly it was hot blood, or a curse, or maybe too much humidity. The town physicians took one look at Frau Trofea and said, brace yourself, let her keep dancing. She'll sweat the bad humors out. She did not. Here's where things go from odd neighbor behavior to apocalyptic rave. Within a week, 30 more people were dancing in the streets. By the end of the month, over 400 medieval men and women sweating through their tunics and clogs, moonwalking through misery. They danced by the bakeries, past the blacksmiths, through the cathedral square. No music, just gasps, groans, and the occasional, ow, my knees. One man danced until his shoes caught fire. Another woman danced until she passed out, then stood up and kept going. One merchant reportedly tried to sell snacks to the dancers. Capitalism finds a way, but not everyone found it funny. Naturally, when something totally unexplainable happens in 1518, the locals had two immediate suspects, God or Satan. Sometimes both. The clergy were divided. Some said it was a punishment from Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers, epileptics, and people with vaguely twitchy limbs. Apparently Vitus was mad, and this was his version of a smite. Others thought the devil had slipped something into Strasbourg's beer, which, to be fair, was entirely possible. Beer was safer than water, but just barely. Soon people were dragging dancers to shrines, lighting candles, offering prayers. Others brought out drums and fiddles to try and help guide the dancers, flailing into something that resembled choreography. Let me tell you, nothing says sacred spiritual cleansing like 300 peasants breakdancing outside a chapel while a priest sobs quietly into his rosary. By week 3, the city council had officially lost its collective mind. Did they shut things down? Number. Did they build a hospital? Of course not. They built a stage. Yes, a literal wooden stage for the dancers. They hired musicians, yes, really, to play music for the dancing plague victims, thinking that if they could just dance it out, they'd recover faster. Dear viewer, that's like giving Red Bull to someone with insomnia. They even assigned professional dancers to keep the rhythm going. You have to imagine a poor lute player tuning his strings, muttering, "This isn't what I signed up for." Meanwhile, the dancing townspeople just kept going. Their shoes disintegrated, their feet bled. Some collapsed and died from exhaustion, heart attacks, or strokes. Estimates range from a few dozen to up to 100 fatalities. Let's recap. A woman dances. People join her. City hires a band. And people literally die from boogieing too hard. Somewhere St. Vitus was laughing his sandals off. So what was it? Demonic possession? Mass hysteria? Poison bread? Bad vibes? An outbreak of spontaneous medieval jazzercise? For centuries, historians have been scratching their powdered heads, trying to explain how hundreds of people in Strasbourg danced themselves halfway to the grave with no music, no party, and no idea why. Let's unpack the leading theories. Theory 1. Ergot poisoning. Sounds like a mythical lizard, doesn't it? But no, it's a mold, a nasty little fungus that grows on damp rye and gets baked into bread. When eaten, it causes twitching, seizures, convulsions, hallucinations, and sometimes full-on freakouts. Yes, friends, this is basically medieval LSD. Imagine biting into your morning loaf and suddenly thinking your feet are on fire while your arms decide to start their own dance career. That's ergot. Sounds plausible, right? Well, sort of. See, ergot poisoning typically affects people individually and symptoms vary wildly. Some hallucinate, some seize, some just sit quietly and scream into bread. It's not exactly known for producing synchronized street raves. So while ergot is trippy, it doesn't quite explain the coordinated chaos of the dancing plague. We need something more collective. Theory 2, mass psychogenic illness, also known as mass hysteria, because nothing brings people together quite like shared psychological collapse. Now let's set the stage. It's 1518. You're surrounded by famine, plague, superstition, corrupt priests, and neighbors who believe sneezing means you're cursed. Life is stress. Pure, yeasty, soul-destroying stress. One woman starts dancing. People watch. They get nervous. They feel the pressure. And then someone else starts dancing. Suddenly it's contagious. Not like a virus, but like an idea. You're not possessed. You're not poisoned. You're just losing it together. If this sounds too bizarre, consider this. There are documented modern cases of this very thing. Entire classrooms of kids fainting, whole villages laughing uncontrollably for days, nuns meowing for weeks. That really happened. Look it up. So yeah, mass hysteria? Plausible. Especially if you've ever joined a group panic over a printer jam or a group chat gone rogue. Theory 3. Cultural trance states. Believe it or not, medieval Europe had a few unusual spiritual outlets. Certain cults and pilgrimages involve group dance rituals, meant to summon saints, seek healing, or exorcise inner demons. Think of it as group therapy, but barefoot and potentially lethal. St. Vitus, remember, was the patron of epileptics, dancers, and anyone who just couldn't stop moving. Some historians argue this outbreak was a kind of extreme, misfired religious expression, like prayer, but with a lot more flailing. So maybe it wasn't a plague. Maybe it was a ritual that got out of hand. Or maybe everyone was just desperately trying to dance away the existential horror of 16th century life, which frankly, I respect. Theory 4, secret medieval cardio cults. Okay, I made this one up, but can you blame me? This story is so ridiculous, so spectacularly surreal, that the idea of a clandestine society gathering to stomp their way to spiritual enlightenment doesn't feel that far-fetched. Imagine it. Welcome to the Order of the Flaming Calf Muscle. Please leave your shoes at the door. So what was it? We may never know for certain. It might have been mold. It might have been madness. It might have been religion, or just humanity, cracking under the weight of hunger, fear, and life without Netflix. But whatever the cause, the result was the same. A town lost itself, to rhythm, to panic, to one woman's unstoppable two-step, and 500 years later, we're still talking about it. In truth, no one knows for sure, But I'll tell you this, it was real, documented, witnessed. And for the townspeople of Strasbourg, it was unforgettable. Or, well, it would have been if they hadn't passed out from pirouetting. Eventually, the city tried something radical, banning music and public dancing. Musicians were outlawed. Dancing shoes were confiscated. Public squares were turned into prayer zones. Anyone caught doing the medieval Macarena was exiled to a shrine deep in the woods, where they would beg Saint Vitus for forgiveness and hopefully cool it with the two-stepping. It worked. Slowly the madness waned. Dancers collapsed. The silence returned, and Strasbourg went back to being a nice little city full of plague, war, and slightly traumatized lute players. Now you'd think after hundreds of people collapsed from jig-induced cardiac arrest, Strasbourg would collectively say, right, let's maybe not do that again. But no, Strasbourg did what all medieval cities did best. They buried the story in chroniclers' journals and politely ignored it. It's like that weird uncle at a family dinner. You know he's there. You just don't make eye contact. Yet despite their efforts, the tale of the town that danced itself into disaster refused to be forgotten. Word spread. Scholars from nearby cities wrote it down. Letters flew across Europe. Even Sebastian Brandt, the author of The Ship of Fools, chimed in. Yes, that was a real book. And yes, I want that on a tote bag. Soon the world was asking, why did this happen? Could it happen again? Did they invent disco? The last one is unconfirmed, but what followed was even more absurd. You see, when something this bizarre occurs, you need a narrative. And in 1518, the best way to spin a story was to blame either God, women, foreigners, or fungi. The Strasbourg elite debated all four. One councilman suggested the dancers had angered God by, wait for it, eating too many sweets during Lent. Another was convinced the town's well water had been cursed by a passing Italian. A third argued that it was witchcraft via shoes. That's right, shoes. Apparently some believed the dancers had worn cursed footwear. I ask you, who was making these shoes? Medieval Nike? Of course, poor Frau Trofea got most of the blame. Clearly she bewitched the townsfolk, they cried. Others claimed she was possessed by demons, or having a religious fit of ecstasy. That lasted over a week and involved minor heart failure. Listen, I've seen people at raves. This was something else. Let's pause and check in with the monks, who were losing their collective tonsures over this. The local abbots began writing to the bishop, then to Rome, pleading, the people are dancing themselves to death. We need relics, holy water, maybe a really stern sermon. Rome, as always, took its time responding. Bureaucracy, you know. In the meantime, a new theory emerged among the clergy, that Saint Vitus had cursed the city because someone didn't properly venerate his statue. Shocking. So they organized a pilgrimage. Dozens of dancers were taken, bleeding feet and all, on a journey to a remote mountain shrine. It was a mix of spiritual retreat, hiking trip, and involuntary medical experiment. There they were told to pray, fast, and dunk their limbs in a sacred river. A few reportedly recovered. Others promptly danced into the bushes. Still, the monks claimed victory. By now you've noticed medieval logic worked a bit like throwing darts at a spinning wheel of guesses. Which brings us to my personal favorite theory, climate anxiety. The early 1500s were part of what historians call the Little Ice Age. Crops were failing, winters were brutal, the sun was being stingy, people were hangry all the time. So when 400 people spontaneously combusted into a citywide twerkathon, it was easy to say, ah yes, this is clearly because the rivers are too low and God is cold. One philosopher even posited that the Earth's melancholic vapors had entered people's brains and made them dance. He was very proud of that theory. He also later died of a nosebleed while reading horoscopes. I'm not making this up. Were they just really stressed? Okay, let's be real for a second. Imagine living in 1518. The Black Death still whispered at your window. The church was falling apart. Martin Luther had just nailed his 95 Theses the year before. There were wars, taxes, rats in your soup, people were tightly wound, and in the absence of therapy, Netflix, or a good meme, What's left? Dance. It was the one way to express overwhelming emotion without being burned at the stake. For some, it became involuntary, a social fever, a shared hysteria, like the first ever TikTok trend, except you couldn't stop doing it and it might kill you. This is what many modern historians believe, that the dancing plague was a stress-induced mass psychogenic illness. Basically, life is so hard we forgot how to not dance. Did it ever happen again? Strangely, yes. There were other outbreaks before and after Strasbourg. In 1374, hundreds danced in Aachen, Germany. In 1237, dozens of children danced 20 kilometers to a nearby town before collapsing. Some believe this inspired the legend of the Pied Piper. He just played a different tune. But none were quite as deadly or as well documented as the summer of 1518. It remains a Super Bowl of spontaneous boogieing. After Strasbourg, authorities got wise. They started cracking down on dance before it turned fatal. No more music in the streets, no public twirling. If someone started toe-tapping, they'd be handed a Bible and told to sit down. Tragic, really. I often think about that summer in Strasbourg, the cobbled streets echoing with the shuffle of broken shoes, the tambourines, the look of panic in a town crier's eyes as another villager joins the fray. Was it absurd? Yes. Was it terrifying? Absolutely. Was it oddly relatable? You bet. Because if you've ever danced alone in your kitchen after a bad day, if you've ever felt the need to move your body to escape your brain, congrats. You've caught a whiff of what they felt. Just, maybe don't do it for 6 days straight. Now you might be thinking, surely after this madness, humanity learned something? A fair thought. But no, the dancing plague of 1518 entered history books mostly as an oddity, a footnote, an academic party trick. Medieval Europe moved on, as it always did, from catastrophe by simply not talking about it, which is a shame, because the dancing plague wasn't just weird, it was a mirror, a disco ball of doom, if you will. It reflected something very real, that when society breaks down, people respond in strange, sometimes communal, sometimes tragic ways. And yet, when I bring this up at parties, people look at me like I've dropped a frog in their wine. Over the centuries, the tale of the dancing plague grew legs and kept dancing. Some later storytellers claim people danced into the river and drowned. Others said the devil himself played a fiddle atop Strasbourg's cathedral, laughing as villagers collapsed like puppets with cut strings. One 18th century painting depicted a group of dancers surrounded by skeletons, like a morbid medieval conga line led by death. That never happened. But hey, the marketing was strong. By the Victorian era, people were publishing pamphlets with titles like The Wrath of Vitus, An Account of Rhythmic Judgment, and The Devil's Gavotte, True Tales of Dance Possession. 100% real fake titles I just made up. But they'd sell. Somewhere along the way, the true, sad, hilarious humanity of it all got buried beneath the absurd. Let's unbury it. Could it happen today? Here's the question I get asked most often, usually by someone clutching their iced coffee with white-knuckled dread. Could something like the dancing plague happen today? My short answer, it already has. Let's review. In 1962, a laughter epidemic broke out in a Tanzanian girls' school. It started with 3 girls. It spread to 95 pupils. Laughter, uncontrollable and contagious, closed 14 schools. Yes, laughter. In the 1980s, hundreds of people in West Africa fainted en masse during a rumored spirit possession outbreak. During the Middle Ages, dozens of nuns across Europe would bark, meow, or climb trees claiming divine ecstasy or animal spirits. One convent had a nun who meowed for years. What do these have in common? Mass psychogenic illness, no virus, no bacteria, just the mind dancing a little too far outside the box. And today, we've got social media. Panic spreads in seconds. One viral video, one weird movement. Add a little fear, a little stress, and bam, you've got modern hysteria. Only now it goes viral on TikTok, not through cobbled streets. The dancing plague of 1518 is just the medieval version of a challenge gone horribly, fatally viral. Now, before we wrap up, allow me to indulge in one of my favorite historical pastimes, reading actual medieval medical advice. Here's what some 16th century physicians actually recommended to cure the dancing mania. Brace yourself. First, rub the soles of the dancers' feet with goat fat and rose oil. Smells fantastic. Might ease the blisters. Won't stop the jitterbug. Next, tie them to an oak tree and whisper prayers into their armpits. Sounds more like a druidic spa day than medicine. Then there's powdered emerald mixed with wine, either to calm them down or, slowly poison them. No one's really sure. And finally, the pièce de résistance. Cover the dancer's head with a lead bowl while chanting the name of St. John. Is it a cure? Is it an early version of noise-canceling headphones? Or just medieval party cosplay? We'll never know. But what's certain is this. The line between medical advice and magical thinking in 1518 was blurrier than a peasant at hour 12 of the world's longest dance-off. So yes, if you ever feel useless, just remember, someone once made a living whispering to sweaty armpits while villagers collapsed mid-cha-cha. Oddly, this bizarre episode didn't just end up in history books. It found its way into music, theater, dance, literature, and yes, YouTube documentaries just like this one. The band Coil made an ambient track inspired by the plague called Om Lagus Garfungaloops. Say that 10 times fast. A dance troupe in New York performed a piece titled St. Vitus Requiem, mimicking the slow descent into trance-like movement and collapse. Authors from Hilary Mantel to Neil Gaiman have referenced it in passing, because what's more gothic than a real-life death dance? Even TikTok owes a quiet nod to Strasbourg's doomed dancers. Truly, the dancing plague refuses to die, which is ironic considering how many people did. So what does this all mean? That humans are weird? Yes. That medieval Europe was a pressure cooker of superstition, disease, and the occasional tap dance from hell? Also yes. But more than anything, this story reminds us that when society gets too heavy, sometimes people break. And when they do, it might look like sobbing, or laughing, or dancing until your legs give out. Was the dancing plague terrifying? Yes. Was it absurd? Absolutely. But it was also human. And what could be more human than moving your body just to forget your mind? So next time someone tells you history is boring, tell them about the summer of 1518, when hundreds of people couldn't stop dancing. The town council built a stage, the priests panicked, the doctors fed them emeralds, and the only cure was no music at all. Thank you for coming on this journey with me.